Hey everybody, thank you so much for clicking on this video. Today we're going to talk all about APT, or anterior pelvic tilt. This is basically like the Instagram model stance. I see a lot of discourse around this online, and specifically I see a lot of not only misinformation, but like miscommunication and just oversimplification of this postural position. So today we're going to clear all of that up. All right, before we keep spilling the tea, we first have to make some tea because we do have a sponsor for today's video, Peak. So I'm heading to the gym in about 30 minutes, and instead of a pre-workout, I'm actually gonna take the Peak Sun Goddess Matcha. Honestly, I've never been a huge fan of pre-workouts. They just always make me feel very jittery and slightly unhinged. So having something like this is a great option for me when I want that little caffeine boost, but I don't wanna feel absolutely crazy. Now this matcha is caffeinated, but it's a slower release, so you don't get that crazy feeling. You also don't get that crash afterwards. So we're just gonna add her to the cup, add a little water, and blend her up. We're also gonna add an ice cube and a straw. Cheers. Now, depending on how strenuous my workout is, I might actually take Peak's BT Fountain Blend when I get back home. So this has electrolytes in it to help replenish any fluids that I lost and prevent any muscle cramps. Electrolytes can also help speed up recovery time, which is an added bonus. So Peak sent me these products a few months ago, and I've been really enjoying incorporating them in my routine because my go-to post-workout treat has been an iced coffee, and I feel like this is just like a smarter option. I also really like that the ingredients are high quality. They come in these easy individual packets, and above all, they taste really freaking good. So if you are looking for some fun little drinks to help support your workouts, make sure you use my link down below, and let's get back into the video. So like I said, APT stands for anterior pelvic tilt, and this is one position our pelvis can be found in. Others include a neutral position or a posterior pelvic tilt. So I want you to imagine your pelvis like a glass of water. We can tip it forward, spilling our lower abdominal front. We can tip it back, rounding the low back a bit, or we can keep it stacked in neutral underneath the ribs. Now you might think that neutral is ideal, but we actually want to have access to all of these pelvic postures. Your joints are meant to move, we're not robots. So being in an anterior pelvic tilt isn't necessarily a bad thing. What's bad is if we can't get out of it, we don't own that position, or we don't have access to other postures. I try to explain to people in this way. If you're sitting all day in one fixed position, your back's probably gonna hurt. But on the flip side, if you're standing all day in one fixed position, your back's probably gonna hurt. The answer isn't one or the other, sit or stand. The answer is to move through all of these different positions, all of these different postures throughout the day. And the same thing goes for your pelvis. Now, let's just say that you favor this position for most of your day. At the end of the video, we'll talk a little bit more specifically about different exercises to be able to access other postures. But first, let's just talk about why this can happen. Now, you could kind of favor or be stuck in this position for a lot of different reasons. We have to remember that the body is a unit. It's not just like individual parts, so everything does kind of work together. But let's talk about a few of the most common reasons why you might favor an anterior pelvic tilt. So first reason, you might be sitting a lot during your day. If you're sitting a lot during the day, your hip flexors are in a constant shortened state. So you might lose the ability to fully extend your hips. Then to compensate, your entire pelvis has to orient forward so you can, walk around and shit. I would say in our current society, especially in America, where a lot of people work corporate jobs, sitting at a desk 9 to 5, this is going to be a huge culprit of why people end up in this anterior pelvic tilt. The second option could actually be that your glutes and your posterior pelvic floor are a little bit tight or just overworking. So what happens here is that tightness on the back of the body is going to dump the pelvis forward since those muscles can't fully relax. Now to counterbalance that shift in the pelvis, you're going to start to bring your weight over the forefoot. And then you kind of have all of these things working together, right? And it does kind of become like a chicken or the egg situation. Like, are those muscles tight back there because the pelvis is pushed forward, or is your pelvis pushed forward because your weight's over the forefoot? Like, they all definitely work together. Again, the body is a unit. And then finally, you might have a weak core or poor pressure management. Now, personally, I don't love when people just kind of slap on this diagnosis of like, oh, if you're stuck in an anterior pelvic tilt, your core and your glutes are weak, because it's really oversimplified. There is probably a lot more going on there. So let's break that down a little bit more strategically. So I want you to think about your core as kind of a canister, like a can of Coke. So inside of this core canister, this is a pressure system. When you inhale, your TVA and your pelvic floor floor are gonna lengthen and your diaphragm descends. As you exhale, your TVA and your pelvic floor shorten and your diaphragm ascends back up. And if we don't have good 360 breathing, allowing the ribs to move in 360 degrees, lots of different dysfunctions can happen, and that pressure of your breath will fill the space that's easiest to access. So technically this is a core issue because your entire trunk is basically your core. But I find that online this gets really misrepresented as like, oh, well, you just have to do more crunches and Russian twists and strengthen your core and then you're good. So I think that the assessment of like, oh, your core is weak doesn't tell you the full picture. It's not really the root cause. It's not necessarily that the weakness caused it. It's the fact that you have a pressure management issue. And this is also why I hate online when I see like, I have APT. It's not a diagnosis. You can't just have it. You can access that position. You can, I guess, be stuck in that position. You can be weak in that position. But you can't just like you can't have anterior pelvic tilt. And that's where I see a lot of these very oversimplified diagnoses happening online. And I think this also brings us into the very important point that a trainer is not qualified to diagnose you with shit. I can't diagnose you with anything. I can tell you that you favor being in an anterior pelvic tilt, but I'm not gonna diagnose you with APT. So if you ever hear anybody say, I have APT, they don't know what they're talking about. It's the same thing as saying like, I have external hip rotation. Do we hear how stupid it sounds now? All right, so now that we understand some of the most common reasons why we can either be stuck in this position, weak in this position, or maybe not access other ones, let's dive in and talk about how to fix it. All right, let's jump into some drills. So this first one is going to be for people who sit for most of the day. So let's say you're someone where their hip flexors are in kind of this constant shortened state and you have trouble fully extending the hips. So we're just gonna need a wall for this. Setting it up against the wall, we're gonna start with our feet in our 90-90 position. So what that means is we've got knees in line with hips and ankles. From here, we're gonna push away, sliding back an inch or two, and we're gonna hug one knee into the chest. From here, keeping the low back down, so we've got that nice posterior pelvic tilt, I'm gonna take an exhale, lift the hips up until I feel a nice stretch through that hip flexor. If you don't feel a stretch, you might need to slide back a little bit more. So what I'm feeling here, I'm feeling hamstring, I'm feeling a stretch into my hip flexor and quad, and I'm actively digging my heel down into the wall. So I want you to take 5 breaths here, expanding through the ribs. Exhale, see if you can extend those hips a little bit more, keeping that posterior pelvic tilt. So we want to avoid arching the low back. I would say 5 breaths on each side, 2 to 3 sets here. And this is a great drill where you can just reteach your body how to access that posterior pelvic tilt and get a nice active dynamic stretch through the front of the hip. All right, let's say your issue is that you have tight glute muscles or a tight posterior pelvic floor. I'm gonna recommend utilizing a rotational kickstand deadlift. So for this guy, you can start at body weight, but then we wanna add some weight as we progress it. So starting at body weight, I'm gonna step 1 foot forward, 1 foot behind. So these toes are tucked under, but the majority of my weight is gonna be over my front foot. Bring your hands on your hips. From here, I'm gonna send the hips back and start to rotate into this leg. So what I'm doing is getting a lot of space through the back of my hip capsule. And then I'm gonna drive into that front foot to stand. Again, you can always bring your hand right on that butt if you wanna know where you should be feeling it. Big stretch. So you feel a nice stretch through the back of your hip here. And up. As we hinge, we really want to make sure we maintain that neutral shin angle, so knee in line with the ankle. So we want to make sure we don't make it more squatty or just pull back. You're going to feel like it's your hamstring. It's probably just you tugging on your sciatic nerve, okay? Once you get comfy, you can grab a medium to heavy weight. I would hold it in the opposite hand, so you can really think about reaching this weight over the pinky toe. So you take a big inhale, you can keep your hand on your butt if you want. We send it back, exhale, drive into that standing leg. Again, inhale and exhale. We do want to make sure that as we hinge, we're not losing tension through the lat. That's going to put it more in the low back. So squeeze this armpit down like you're holding a $100 bill under there. Times are tough. Inflation, corporate greed, whatever you want to call it. And that should help. I would say you can incorporate these in your warm-up or on a recovery day, and I would recommend doing 5 to 10 reps on each side, 1 to 3 sets, depending on what you're trying to get out of it. All right, our last drill is gonna be for somebody who maybe has a weak core connection, or maybe just has a poor pressure management within their core canister. So we're gonna do this one from our 90-90 position, so very similar to our wall setup. You can use a bench or a chair here, and I'm actually gonna dig my heels down down instead. Again, we want knees in line with ankles and the hips. Pulling the toes up for a nice active ankle. I'm gonna tuck the hips under so my low back is down. First thing I want you to do is bring your hands around your ribs. I like to make hamburger hands and bring around the rib cage. From here, I want you to expand the ribs, so trying to get that 360 contraction or expansion. Big inhale. On your exhale, we contract, your ribs should move back in. Inhale and exhale. As you're going through this, we want to make sure we're maintaining that posterior pelvic tilt or that little tuck under, and to progress it, you can lift the hips just an inch or two, getting a little bit more hamstring involvement and making sure again that as you get that low back off the floor, we're not going into that anterior tilt. So we want to tuck the hips under, shining your tailbone to the wall in front of you. In terms of reps here, I would recommend 2 to 3 sets of 5 breaths, really making sure that you're elongating the exhale. So exercises like this and every other one that I just took you through, they're only going to be as hard and as effective as you make them. Now, all of these exercises are fantastic and they're a great starting point, but you have to remember that in any setting, whether it's in a corrective setting, whether it's in a training setting, you need to be progressing these things over time to make them more challenging and challenge your system more. For example, if you go to physical therapy and you get assigned clamshells as an exercise drill for whatever your issue is, but you never progress past clamshells, you're probably never going to progress back into whatever injured you in the first place. So the same thing goes with all of the work that I just showed you today. Everything we did is a great foundational starting point, but then how do we not only progress it, but integrate it into our training and into our daily movement? So if you have any questions about any of the drills that we worked through today or just anything we chatted about in this video, please let me know down below. Make sure you hit that subscribe button so you don't miss out, and I will see you all in the next one.